Hey friends, how's it going? Welcome back to Deep Dive. What you're about to hear is an interview with Will Storr, who is the best-selling author of this book, The Status Game, and he's written a bunch of other books, including a book, Selfie, which is all about like selfie and social media culture and how we're obsessed with ourselves. But this new one is fantastic. It's called The Status Game, and it's one of my favorite topics. It's basically about all of the different ways in which practically all human behavior is ultimately motivated towards seeking and acquiring more social status. We talk about how status is a fundamental part of the human condition and how this has been a thing from like the dawn of time. We talk a little bit about the 3 different types of status games that we can play in everything that we do. And we talk a little bit about how the pursuit of status is often seen as a negative thing, but it can actually drive us to do bigger and better things with our lives. And we also talk about practical ways to increase one's social status if you're into that kind of thing by, tactics like warmth and sincerity, which sound like tactics, but are actually just generally being a decent human being. So yeah, hope you enjoy the discussion. Okay, let's talk about the status game. How did you become interested in the topic of the pursuit of social status?
Well, so The Heretics and then Selfie and then The Science of Storytelling, those 3 books were all about that idea of the brain as a storyteller. They were all pursuing this one idea, which is the brain is this delusional machine, which, as I said before, remixes reality into this heroic story. We're in the middle of the world, the universe, everything revolves around us. We're amazing, As long as we're psychologically healthy, we have all these, crazy biases. So, I started to think, okay, so if that's what's really going on, if that's the kind of delusion we're in the middle of, if that's the kind of lie of the brain, what's the truth of the brain? Ooh. What's actually going on kind of beneath the hood? And so this phrase that I read, I think it was a psychologist called, Robert Hogan came up with this phrase. That I used it in The Selfie and The Science of Storytelling, that our secret subconscious drive is to get along and get ahead. And I thought I always love that because it's so simple to understand.
Get along and get ahead, yeah.
And the reason it's those things is because we're tribal. We're a tribal animal. We're these apes that have mastered the art of cooperative living. We're driven to, and so for those reasons, we have these very strong subconscious urges to getting together in groups of people who are like-minded, and pursue goals with them, but also compete for status with other members of that group, but also those groups compete for status with rival groups. Yeah. And so that's tribal life. That's life in the tribe. That's why we organize, human life is organized like that, because it was organized like that 20,000 years ago on the African savannah. I always find it's amazing that that's still human life today. Those groups are political groups, they're football teams, they're cults, they're religions, they're corporations. That's just what we do. That's human social life. It's groupish and it's competition. And so the status game is really a book about that. Get along and get ahead. That's what a game is. A game is you get along, you clump into a group of people that you're playing a game with, and then you start competing.
Yeah. How did the story kind of come together? Did you start off with the hypothesis that this is a thing and then find the stories and the examples and stuff to back it up? Or was it more investigative? Like, what was the approach there?
Yeah, it was... So when I was researching Selfie, and Selfie is about how in the West, we're very individualistic and, self-obsessed, relatively speaking, to the rest of the world. And so it was looking at kind of selfie culture, that narcissistic selfie culture.
That's a great title, by the way.
Yeah, it wasn't mine. I can't take credit for that.
I remember seeing it, I think in 2017 or something.
Yeah, that's when it came out.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting book. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, and I interviewed this guy called Professor Bruce Hood, who's a very well-known psychologist down at the University of Bristol. And in my interview, he said to me, he said, why do we do the things that we do? He said, once we've got enough money to live and survive, and we've got enough money for our families to survive, everything's just about validation. You didn't use the word status, you used the word validation. That's why we write books, that's why we pursue, that's why I'm a scientist. And when he said that, my immediate response was, oh, come on, that's so cynical. Such a ridiculous thing to say. And then I just sort of thought about it for another 30 seconds. And I just thought, I think he's right. Yeah. I think he's right. I really do think he's right. And that just really stayed with me. And then I just started researching it. Just started looking at the science of kind of status. But then the light bulb moment for me was really the game part of it. But because if you just say it's all about status, that's half the story. The other half is the connection. Once we've connected, it's that connecting with other people. So once I sort of started to realise that one of the light bulb moments for me was one of my ghostwriting clients, actually. And he's a guy with a working class background who became very successful, and he's very very alpha male, like, powerful, military background, like for some lower middle class, like book geek like me, quite intimidating. And, when I first met him, it was at a meeting at a publishing company. I was a bit nervous to be with him because I felt like, as far as he's concerned, I'm this wimp, this little nerdy wimp, with my little cardigan on. But I kind of felt that he was a bit nervous to meet me. He was a bit uncomfortable meeting me. And that really made me sort of, what was going on there? And it was great because he was really nice, and I was expecting him to be a bit dismissive of me, but he was so nice, and he was really enthusiastic to understand. And his whole thing with me was just like, mate, I don't know what you do, but just do what you do.
Yeah.
Just make this a great book. And, he'd really trusted me.
Yeah.
And that was the big breakthrough for me because I realized that we have different ways of measuring status. Like his way of measuring status is with physical strength, banter, probably football, like talking about football. I don't know about that. That's his criteria for claiming status, and that's what he's proud of. His physicality.
Yeah.
Whereas my criteria for claiming status are things like books you've written and getting nice reviews in the Times, or fucking paintings on the walls, all those kinds of things. And that's when I suddenly realized we're not all competing with each other. We're playing different status games. Yeah. So when he came around my house to work on my book and he saw the paintings on the walls and all the books on the shelves, even with the fact of his incredibly masculine life, he probably would have felt a little bit intimidated and a little bit uncomfortable because he's in a different world now. Yeah. And his criteria for claiming status suddenly doesn't count. Yeah. And he, and when I go into his world and I'm meeting with his very, very masculine, terrifying, people, I'm like, shit, know. I mean, everyone's really nice. But that was the breakthrough. Like we're playing different status games. And the thing to understand is that we're not all competing with each other. We're all playing little individual games. And each of these games has kind of symbolic ways of claiming status. So if you think about Monopoly, the way you symbolize status in Monopoly is those little plastic houses and hotels and the money, and that's how we play status games. So his symbolic claims to status is his physicality, his history of extreme violence, his success, his huge successes in that physical world, and probably he's very proud of playing. I don't know if you can imagine football or whatever those things are. And mine are completely different, and it was that understanding that really made me see the world in a different way. To understand the status games that we all play and how they drive us and make us kind of different kinds of people.
We're going to take a very quick break to introduce our sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is a fantastic online platform for learning maths, science, and computer science with interactive and engaging courses that I've been using for many years. But to be honest, I wish I'd had the lessons in maths to hand when I was preparing for my BMAT when applying to medical school. A lot of the time when we're taught maths at school, the focus is on empty memorization of formulas that we can apply in our exams. But the great thing about Brilliant is their courses teach you how to actually understand concepts from a first principles approach and develop the intuition to solve problems. Also, their computer science series is absolutely sick. They've got some fantastic courses on algorithms, on learning to program with Python. They've got a whole series about cryptocurrency and understanding exactly how things like Bitcoin work from the ground up, which is genuinely fascinating. So if you want to give their lessons in maths a try, or even science or computer science, then head over to brilliant.org/deep dive, and the first 200 people to sign up via that link will get 20% off the annual subscription to the website. So thank you so much, Brilliant, for sponsoring this episode. Yeah. As I was listening to the audiobook, I found myself thinking that it is very hard to get away from the idea that seeking status is bad, and that similar to with the stuff they talk about in The Elephant in the Brain, that quote allegedly from JP Morgan that a man always has two reasons for doing something: the good reason and the real reason. And if I think of like what's my real reason for being a YouTuber, for doing this podcast, for wanting to write a book, it's like if I've got to be honest with myself, it is broadly status motivated, and I'm like, shit, this is bad. Like, shouldn't I have a more like altruistic impact? And it's like, yeah, it's kind of nice, like teaching people. It's kind of fun talking to a camera, but really, if I was like talking to people and then hitting delete rather than hitting publish, suddenly that changes the equation. And so, okay, what's going on there? What do you think about that? That like when I guess when we think or when we point out the status thing, it feels like a negative.
It does feel like a negative. And that was the journey I went on, because it isn't. I mean, it can be a negative. Yeah. There's lots of negative in the book about the bad sides of the status game. But it's also what's made civilization. It's what makes us good people. The history of the status game, again, goes back to those tribes, the tribes in which we evolved. And so, nature has to find a way of incentivizing us to be valuable people. We humans can be very selfish and self-interested and delusional, and all those things. So how do you get these creatures that have a tendency towards selfishness to be selfless and to work for the benefit of the tribe? Well, you incentivize them with status, and status is this reward. So what happened was, we were playing status games with our reputation. We had a reputation in the tribe, and you'd get a good reputation. You'd go up in the status game if you proved yourself to be valuable to the tribe. And there's two ways of being valuable to the tribe. You can be virtuous, so you can be generous, courageous in battle, a follower of rules and an enforcer of rules, or you can be successful. So you can be valuable to the tribe by being a really great honey finder, a really great hunter, a really great storyteller, a really great sorcerer. So it's this reward that you get for being valuable, for being useful, for being kind and generous. And so that was true 10,000 years ago. It's still true today. It's, if you think about, like, we're not used to seeing people like Gandhi and Malala as superstars, as celebrities, but they are. They are moral superstars. And that's good. It's good. That's good. That's humanity at its best, I think, is when we see valuable people like Gandhi, or like the people who invented the AstraZeneca vaccine, and we make celebrities of them. We're celebrating them as we're making them heroic. And so, without that, we wouldn't have civilization. We wouldn't have the moral world as we know it, because, you can feel it with the moral status thing. When you do something good and kind, you feel it in your body.
Oh, great.
You go, ooh, you feel up. You literally feel physically up, And when other people find out that you've done a nice thing, they go, oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And that's an automatic response. And that's brilliant. That's the best of the human animal. So I do think I completely agree with you that we are conditioned to seeing status as this negative thing, and it can be a very negative thing. But it's also the very, very best of who we are as a species. In the book, I talk about like things like the origin of the iPhone, for example. When Steve Jobs kept meeting this guy from Microsoft at these parties because his wife was friends with his wife, and this guy we've solved computing, we're going to kill Apple, we've got this new touchscreen device with a stylus. And Steve Jobs was just livid because he was like, hey, he didn't talk to me like that. Microsoft solved computing. And he came in and apparently there was a set of expletives, and he said, right, we're going to show them how it's really done. And it's not a stylus, it's with your finger. Make the thing with the finger. Yeah. And they made it. And that was the iPhone, and then became the iPad. It started off as the So that's a great example of somebody Steve Jobs was very interested in status, unusually, obsessed with status. And the iPhone, for good or for better or for worse, has changed the world. And it began with just somebody feeling belittled at a barbecue in California.
I guess if we think of our own motivations, kind of on an individual level, the way I kind of think of it is that there is always some kind of status game that I'm playing in basically everything I do, but there's nothing I can do about it, and so it's actually kind of fine. And so similar to why do I go to the gym? Well, I can pretend it's for health reasons, but really everyone knows what the real reason behind going to the gym is. Yeah. But that's not the end of the world. It's we don't need to have fully pure altruistic motives for the things we do to still actually be good.
That's right. It's like Men's Health isn't really a health magazine. It's a sexy body magazine. It's an I want to look good naked magazine, and that's that's right. The health version of that I don't think it would sell very particularly well. You can't get away from it. It's in your kind of body. It's in your brain. Yeah. As soon as you're out in the world mixing with people, it's automatic. You're judging them, they're judging you. The game is on.
So one thing that that you talk about in the book is when status is taken away, that can often be like a really, really terrible thing. I wonder if you can kind of elaborate that on that a little bit.
Yeah. So status is this kind of social nutrient. It's like it's an essential kind of thing that we need. We need to feel respected and valued by the people around us. And when we don't, we become unwell. We become psychologically unwell. Become depressed, become stressed, become anxious. We also can become physically unwell when we're kind of repeatedly, robbed of status. At its most extreme, in the book I write about humiliation, the state of humiliation. And humiliation is, we've all been there, it's a horrific kind of experience. And humiliation is this, it's not just that you've been robbed of all your status within a group, you've been robbed of the ability to claim it ever again in the future. Like it's gone so wrong that people are like, leave, we don't want anything to do with you anymore. And you're kind of forbidden from the group. And that's, that's a fearsome thing. Subconsciously, that's the equivalent, back in the tribal days, if we were that lacking in status within the group, it would have been probably a death sentence. Either we were kicked out of the group, and that's a death sentence in itself, or we were executed. Execution, capital punishment, is thought to have once been a human universal. So we really fear it, and we need status. It's this kind of fundamental, psychological nutrient. And I think when in the book I write about people who are kind of humiliated again and again and again and again, and these are the people that become very unwell and often extremely violent. There's a chapter in the book on mass murderers, serial killers, spree killers, terrorists, honor killers, and humiliation is deeply implicated in all of those phenomena.
Given that kind of, if we accept that we're all sort of playing status games, is there anything that we can / should do differently as we're going about our lives in keeping that in the back of our minds?
Yeah, I think it's useful to be aware of the game is, when the game is in process. Yeah. It's often very easy to become irritated and frustrated by little slights that people might make to us. Anybody who's seen Curb Your Enthusiasm, that's all about a guy who is highly attuned to kind of status slights. In the book I write about this study about glasses of orange juice, and this is the thing: if you pour lots of glasses of orange juice for people, but you get slightly less orange juice than everybody else, it's really you get really upset about it, and that's because it's not actually just a mouthful of orange juice you've been robbed of. Yep. It's your brain has gone. That's symbolic of your status. So that's how insanely obsessed the brain is, the subconscious brain is, with our relative status. And we're all used to, every day we probably have an experience where we feel a bit slighted. And I think once you understand that that's just your brain being a completely obsessive idiot about your status, it's much easier to, you don't stop feeling the feelings, but I think you can separate yourself from them much easier and just stop, almost like a Buddhist, look upon yourself and go, oh, that's my brain being stupid. But I think one of the big takeaways for me as well is that I think we often forget that we have status to give, like the prestige forms of status, virtue and success, those two forms of prestige. We get them from other people. Other people voluntarily give them to us when we do good things. Yeah. And so we have status to give, like unlimited reserves of status to give other people. Yeah. And we're often quite bad at giving it. We often quite jealously hoard our kind of stores of status. And I think, I think just life for ourselves it gets much better when we're more generous with status. Yeah. Even for a slightly selfish reason that people want to be around us more if we're giving out that stuff. As long as you're not completely inauthentic about it, I think there's a risk that you go. It's like Hollywood, and like the LA thing of, oh my God, you look amazing, and nobody believes a word you're saying. As long as it doesn't sort of lapse into that, I think understanding that great gift that you have, and that you can give it to people and really make their day.
So what does that look like in practice? Like, is it like laughing at someone's joke, even if it's borderline funny? I don't think you have to be inauthentic about it. Yeah. I think there's always something nice you can find to say about somebody, and and it's just saying it. Yeah. Like sometimes it can go wrong. The reason I stopped there is because I was slightly uncomfortable. I was doing an interview to promote the status game with this woman, and on the radio, she had a really beautiful speaking voice, and after the
after the interview, I said, "You've got such a beautiful speaking voice," and I think I made her a bit uncomfortable. I think she thought I was coming up to her. I was like, "Oh God!" Yeah, so sometimes you got to be careful about that. I really wasn't, but like I was just trying to be nice.
Yeah.
But it's things like that, there's always something nice. Something nice. I mean, she might not have. I was worried that she thought that it came out badly. But yeah. So as long as it doesn't come off as creepy or insincere, I think that there's always this sort of gift that we can give other people.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You said in another podcast that you were on, I think on Jordan Hobbing's show, you said that the whole, you were talking about this whole idea of when people say, "Oh, I don't care what people think of me."
Yeah.
I wonder if we can elaborate on that a little bit. What's the deal with that? We are going to take a little quick break from the podcast to introduce the sponsor of this podcast, which is Curiosity Stream. If you haven't heard by now, Curiosity Streams is the world's leading documentary streaming subscription platform, founded by John Hendricks, who's the founder of the Discovery Channel. And on Curiosity Stream, they've got hundreds of really high quality, high budget documentaries covering all sorts of things, from science and technology to history and ancient civilizations to food and medicine and meditation and like all of the stuff in between. Now, the really cool thing about Curiosity Stream is that they support independent creators. And so there's this service called Nebula, which you might have heard of. It's an independent streaming platform that's run by me and a bunch of other creators. And on Nebula, we can put content like videos and behind the scenes and longer form stuff without worrying about things like the YouTube algorithm. And so, for example, on Nebula, I have a bunch of exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. We actually have the original season 0 of the Deep Dive podcast, which started off as like remote Zoom live streams during the pandemic. And that is only available on Nebula. You won't find it anywhere else. So if you enjoy the sorts of conversations we have on Deep Dive, you might like to see, a whole year before we started this podcast properly, once the pandemic stopped, what sort of conversations I was having with people on Zoom. I've also got a series of videos on Nebula called Workflow, which is where I deep dive into some of my favorite productivity tools. And on Nebula, you also get early ad-free access to my videos and videos from a bunch of other creators that you might be familiar with, like Thomas Frank and Tom Scott and Legal Eagle and Lindsay Ellis. And the really cool thing is that because Curiosity Stream loves supporting independent creators, we've got a little bundle deal, which is that if you sign up for an account on Curiosity Stream, you actually get free access to Nebula bundled with that. So if you head over to curiositystream.com/deep dive, then for less than $15 a year, you can get full access to Curiosity Stream's incredible library of documentaries and also free access to all of the stuff on Nebula bundled with that. So head over to curiositystream.com/deep dive to get the bundle deal. So thank you, Curiosity Stream, for sponsoring this episode.
Well, it's not true. It's never true. We're a social animal. We are wired, to our core to care about what other people think of us. It's in the human machine. It's part of our human nature to care about what other people think of us. And I think, as I said before, it always makes me laugh when people say that, because they always say it in a certain way. I don't care what other people think of me.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you're just that's just another way of claiming status. You're claiming that you're better than everybody else.
Yeah.
And it's so ironic because it's obviously very important to them that other people think that they don't care what other people think about them. So it's just, it's just never true. And I think if it is true, if it ever was true about somebody, that's going to be a person who is extremely badly socially adjusted and will likely end up either in prison or in or in some sort of institution. If you don't care what other people think about you, you're not going to be a functional person.
Yeah. So there was an interesting chapter where you talked about sort of the real life cues that we give off when we are higher status or lower status. And I wonder, often, we did a survey for the podcast and people said that they like getting actionable tips that they can apply in their work life.
Yeah.
And I was kind of thinking that, are there actionable tips that you can apply in your work life? For example, knowing that the status game exists in every relationship you're going to have at work, for example.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I think is really important is in the business context is to always have that understanding that you're never the hero in other people's stories. They're always the hero. They're always the one on this great pursuit of status, which their brain remixes as this kind of heroic, pursuit. And so it's much better in the business context to come across as you're a helpful person in their story.
Yeah.
So there's a story scholar who I think was a really smart guy called Christopher Booker, who wrote a book called The 7 Basic Plots. It's like a huge 2,000 page thing. I think it's like a huge kind of tome. But he writes about this archetypal figure in story called the light figure, and the light figure is like
the light as in light.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. The light figure. Okay. And the light figures come into the story and they're like the ghosts in the Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
Their job is there to help Scrooge become heroic, to see the area. And so I think in the business context, if you go in there boasting, I'm amazing, you want to work with me, I'm fantastic, you're going to put people off because you're not the hero, they're the hero.
Yeah.
And so you're much better off being the light figure. And your story is, this is how I'm going to help you gain status. I'm going to do these things to help you. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is about impression management. So there's lots of science has looked at how socially do we give a good impression to other people. And for a long time, they talked about two domains, warmth and competence. Yeah. And more recently, it's been argued that there should be a third domain added to that, which is morality.
Okay.
And when I was reading about this, it really struck me because in the book, I write about there's three status games. There's dominance, which is the aggressive, animalistic status game. There's virtue and there's success. And those three, they called them warmth, competence, and morality. But I called it warmth, competence, and sincerity. Okay. Map on perfectly to those three status games. Yeah. So I don't know, but I don't think that's a coincidence. Yeah. You know, I think that it's interesting that those map onto those three status games so well. And the logic is, when you approach somebody with warmth, what you're subconsciously signaling to that person is that I'm not going to compete for status with dominance with you. I'm not going to threaten you. I'm not going to coerce you. I'm not going to use physical violence against you. You know, so we're going to have a healthy, non-aggressive status game. When you're signaling with sincerity, you're saying, I'm going to play a good virtue game with you, which is I'm going to be, morally respectable. And that's not mean I'm going to suck up to you. I'm not going to give you bullshit. I'm going to tell you the truth. And when I'm not happy, I'm going to tell you I'm not happy. So I'm going to be sincere. You know, I'm always going to be honest with you. And then finally, competence. If you come across as a competent person, you are signaling, not only am I going to be useful to our group, our game, but you also might learn some stuff from me. So there are things that I can do, and if you learn how to do them from me, you're also going to raise in status. Yeah. So I think if you can, it's obviously easier said than done, but if you can manifest in those three ways, warmth, sincerity, and competence, it's very hard to know how you're going to fail in life. You can't just come across in those ways. You've got to actually live those ideals. You've got to be sincere. You've got to be non-aggressive, and you've got to be competent. You've got to be good at you've got to be good at the thing that you're doing. I think that's kind of a practical idea.
Warmth, sincerity, and confidence.
Competence.
Oh, competence. Of course. Yeah, competence. Yeah, it strikes me that have you seen Suits?
No.
Oh, so there's this, it's this lawyer show, and this guy, Harvey Specter, who's like this big shot lawyer. Yeah. And the way he comes across to his clients is very warm, sincere, and competent. Okay. The way he comes across to his opposition is very like dominant and like full-on alpha male, like that kind of stuff going on. Yeah. Do you think in non-work contexts, like in social contexts, it strikes me that maybe the competence matters less and it's actually about warmth and sincerity?
Yeah, I think, there is always those two things going on, connection and status, getting along and getting ahead. Yeah. And I think when it comes to connection, belongingness, warmth and sincerity are obviously really important. Yeah. And I was thinking connection more important. I mean, virtue, I guess, matters for status and for connection. Yeah. But I think, yes, but status, competence is very much a kind of status. Yeah, you're attracted to competent people because you're impressed by them, not because you feel like you want to. Yeah. I
remember I was reading Happy by Derren Brown. Like this, he talks about stoicism and stuff. And one of the lines that really stuck with me and from that book was that we think people are attracted, or people we sometimes think people are attracted to competence, but in fact they're attracted to warmth. And like. I think definitely when I was younger, I thought the way to make friends was to signal how competent I was at like A, B, and C. And then over time, I actually realized that actually no one actually cares in a friends context. Yeah. In a business networking type context, fine. But in a friends context, actually warmth and sincerity is the way forward.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that's true. But I also think there's I don't think. I think you could, like at school, people want to be friends with the best footballer. So
there is that element.
I do. There is that stuff going on as well. I don't think it's true to say completely like that we don't want to be friends with competent people, because I don't. People who are really able are very attractive people. Like they suck in people around them. There's a book called The Secret of Our Success by Joseph Henrich, which is really good, writing about that, about how attractive competencies to other people. And you know, I wonder if there's a gender difference there too. I don't know whether it's more of a kind of male thing. I don't know. You know?
Oh, on that note, in your research, did you notice any gender differences in how the different genders compete for status?
I try to keep away from gender a little bit because it's so dangerous. It's a dangerous area to arrive at.
Yeah.
But I kept it on not quite safe ground, but safe in terms of the research. Yeah. And so the research on this is so solid. It's basically inarguable. Yeah. Like it's so well evidenced. And so all over the world, there is a generalized, and it's important to say it's general. It's not every woman is different from every man in this way. It's just a generalization. But generally speaking, there are differences in interests in the kind of games that we play. Okay. So women tend to be more interested in people, and men tend to be more interested in things. So if you got 100, you know, people, 50 women and 50 men together, and said step forward those who are interested in tractors, the chances are that more men than women would step forward. And you know what that means is that if you've got a tractor factory, there's going to be more men than women working there, and more men at the top of the hierarchy. And that's not going to be because of sexism. It's going to be because of predictable differences in interest. So I thought so that's as far as I went with gender in the book, because it's so well evidenced that like it's so clear that difference, and it's so universal. The question is whether that's genetic, whether it's actually in our genes, or whether that's socialization. But because it's universal, I'm dubious that it's completely socialization. Yeah. Like if it was socialization, cultures are so different around the world. You'd expect to see quite a lot of variety. Yeah. You'd expect to find this culture over here where you know the computer engineers are mostly women, and that doesn't exist. Yeah, you know. So you know so that is very well evidenced that. So and I think that's a mistake that's often made in the culture, where you get certain industries that are male dominated and some that are female, like you know teaching, nursing, female dominated, and there's often a kind of patriarchy argument, like an argument from conspiracy overlaid on top of that, and often that's not really what's going on. It's just a result of how, generally speaking. The injustice in that for me is that often those people-centered industries, they don't pay well compared to the things versus industries, and that's the thing that's not fair. But how you fix that, who knows? Yeah.
While we're on the topic, did you come across any race differences in how the status game is played at all? Was that
not race differences? No. I'd be very skeptical if somebody was to argue that there are any race differences. I think there are cultural differences.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there are big cultural differences. The main one that we know about academically is East versus West. So West, we're individualist, and so we see status pursuit is much more about the individual. It's about me and my achievements, and so you know we are kind of self-aggrandizing. We're kind of relatively show-offy, whereas in the East that's seen as very taboo, and the East is much more communitarian culture. It's Confucian versus Aristotelian in a way, and that Confucian communitarian culture is much more about the group, and so status pursuit is much more about the group, serving the group, and so how that manifests in day-to-day life. There was a very interesting paper that I write about in the book by, I think it was a Japanese anthropologist who writes about face, the concept of face.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, it's fascinating, he said that that in Japan, if an individual is picked out, one member of a group is picked out for individual praise, that's seen as extremely shameful and embarrassing, because what you've done is you've made everybody else look worse in the group. And so what they'll do, that person usually, is they'll deliberately do a really terrible job at work, you know, for the next days or weeks, in order to be the worst in the group, to kind of rebalance the group, you know. So that's completely the opposite in the West, where it's like, I'm the best, fuck you guys, you know. That's kind of the thing that we do. So that's a huge cultural difference. And in you know, I wrote about that in Selfie. Susan Cain also writes about this in her book Quiet, and in the book she writes about how in China shyness is seen as a leadership quality, which again is a completely different way that we experience the status game in the West. It's much more about confidence, personal confidence here, but you know, whereas people with shyness are high status in China. So definitely, so no race differences, but certainly lots and lots of cultural differences.
The whole status thing has clearly been around for a very long time. But then you add the internet and you add social media onto this thing.
Yeah.
What are the kind of implications in your...
Well, social media is just one huge status game. If you think about those three games, dominance, virtue, and success.
Yeah.
That's what social media is. It's like there's people doing dominance, being aggressive to each other, bullying each other, doxing and cancelling and all that stuff. There's virtue, people signaling, I think they're talking about politics, is all about virtue stuff. This person's bad, this person's good, this law is bad, this law is good, all that stuff. And there's also success games. Look at my amazing gym body, look at my healthy breakfast, look at my tan knees in the Maldives, know. So that's what social media is. It's dominance, virtue, and success. And so, one of the things I also write about in Selfie is this idea we have that, these are kind of inventions of Silicon Valley, and they've kind of created these things which have like distorted the world and made us. Yeah. But I don't think that's how it works. In Selfie, I write about how the selfie camera was invented as a business tool for doing conferences, and it was called the front-facing camera when it was launched, and then it was us, the people, that decided to do selfies, and then the tech companies went, okay, if that's what you want to do with them, then here's Instagram and here's So Twitter wasn't Twitter, as we know, when it launched, it was a free SMS text message service, So what you've got are these technologists kind of working out by trial and instinct what people want and giving it to them, and what people want are status games, and that's what Twitter is, that's what Instagram is, that's what TikTok is. And in the book, I write about, I call the social media a slot machine for status, and I think it's quite well known. By people who are interested in sort of have a kind of behind the scenes interest in social media, or that the BJ Fogg behavior model, which is that idea, is this kind of evil genius who he wrote this book in 2003 predicting the iPhone, just extraordinary, writing about this young girl who has this device that's about the size of a pack of cards and her whole life's on it, and he basically foresaw the thing in 2003. It was unbelievable. Not only did he foresee the iPhone or the smartphone, he came up with this model of how to make it basically not addictive, like a compulsive, like to make it so it was hard to put down. And what he wrote was that what you want to make is it gives rewards, but the rewards are unpredictable. Yeah. So like a slot machine, you pull the thing, you don't know what's going to happen. You're going to get the money, you're not going to get the money. And so when it's unpredictable, you can't stop looking at it. Yeah. And so that's quite well known. But I think the missing piece for me is what are you gambling with? And what you're gambling with is status. That's exactly what you're gambling with whenever you make a contribution to social media, whether it's a comment on Twitter or a photo on Instagram or whatever, or something on LinkedIn about your new project. Yeah,
you always want to refresh and be like, oh, how many likes have I got?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, how's it done? How's it done? And you can go up, you can go down, and that's what's compulsive about it. So yeah, that's that, and I think that's why social media is universally, like, it's gone around the world. It's not just a Western thing, it's all around the world. And because it's status is a universally necessary. It's part of the human condition. It's part of it's part of what we are as a species. So it's addictive.
Yeah. I guess one of the main takeaways that I took, because I'm as I read stuff like this, I'm always kind of interested. Like, yeah, that's cool, kind of from a society level in terms of understanding stuff. But is there something that I can do myself to kind of apply this knowledge in an interesting way?
Yeah.
And I often think about status when it comes to when it comes to how I feel about like my own career and stuff. Where like back in the day where my peer group was medical students and doctors, there was a status game going on for who was getting the highest grades, who was the best looking, who was like best at sports, etc. Like, there were all these different kind of fields of status game being played. But because I was doing the YouTube stuff and business stuff at university, I'd sort of opted out of the status games that, quote, everyone else was playing, and was doing very well in this other thing, which to me was, I was like, oh yeah, I'm high status because I'm the only one who's doing this business stuff. And then over time, as I was working for 2 years as a doctor, I was one of the probably most successful YouTubers in that sphere. Very easy to win that status game. Now that I am not a doctor anymore, I'm like, shit. Like, now the status game that I sort of find myself playing is with all of the other YouTubers. Yeah. Of which there are loads of them who are more successful than I am. Yeah, and now I'm like, God damn it. And so I find myself doing this weird thing where, or for example, where I speak to a lot of startup founders, and startup founders make like stupid amounts of money, even more stupid amounts than YouTubers make.
Yeah,
and so it's like, oh, this guy is, having 2 million subscribers is cool, but this guy's got £100 million business. What the hell? And because the peer group, the comparison group has changed, the way that I personally feel about my own accomplishments and my own level of status is always kind of in flux based on who I'm speaking to and all this kind of stuff. But when I recognize this, I kind of take a step back, try to do that kind of Buddhist thing of like, no, hang on, this is just my brain going wild because of the status stuff. I actually don't need to think this way. I can actually just try and focus on being grateful for what I have and trying to opt out of the status game as much as possible, knowing that it's never really going to be fully possible because we're all human at the end of the day, but it is at least something to aspire to, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. I think it's really valuable to understand the game that we're all playing, and then once you do, you can kind of think yourself. You can sort of foster more kind of healthy habits. I think in that way, and it's tough. I mean, the game that you're playing now as a YouTuber is hard. It's a tough one, but as I said before, I think the trick is knowing that this isn't the last game you're going to be playing. This is going to
the stepping stone.
Yeah, it's a stepping stone to who knows what. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nice. I posted on Instagram asking if anyone has questions for you, and so we have a bunch of questions that people have asked through Twitter and through Instagram. So Sarah Coe asks, how does status actually lead to longevity if it doesn't lead to happiness? I don't know. She's getting some kind of link between status and longevity. Like longer. There's
a famous set of studies called the Whitehall studies.
Oh, okay.
There's a guy called Dr. Michael Marmot, which looked at the British Civil Service, which is a huge organisation, very stratified. And what he found was that the higher you went up the hierarchy, the better your health outcomes, the lower your mortality, and so you might think, okay, that's because the richer you are, the more you're eating salad and having a personal trainer. But that wasn't true. It was separate from kind of lifestyle and all that stuff. And what he found was that if the person at the very top of that hierarchy smoked and the person one beneath that person also smoked, that one person beneath would be more likely to get sick as a result of their smoking than the one at the top. So it was the brain is incredibly sensitive to our level of relative status, where we sit in our status games of life. And they found that this is true for men and for women. And the health differentials were really quite extraordinary. They even found it in laboratory conditions with baboons. So they got these poor bloody baboons in a lab, and they fed them a really terrible diet, like high calorie crisps or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Probably delicious, but really bad for them.
Yeah.
And they found that the same true for baboons as was in the civil service, was that the lower you were down the hierarchy, the more likely they were to get sick as a result of their bad diets. And then they changed the hierarchy. I don't know how they did it, but they conspired to change the hierarchy of the baboon troop, and the health outcomes changed in lockstep. So that's just extraordinary evidence that Marmot calls this the status syndrome. And so it's kind of speculative as to why that's true. But there's a field called social genomics, quite a new field called social genomics. And social genomics is the science of how our social world impact the function of our genes.
Yeah.
And I interviewed a guy called Professor Steve Cole out in University of California, who's an expert in social genomics, and he thinks it's to do with inflammation, which you obviously know all about as a medic. The idea that if we're kind of lower on the totem pole, the body's preparing you for attack and for trouble and for crisis, and we're not designed to be in inflammation for a long period of time, and we are designed to be in inflammation for a short period of time. And if we and it also changes our antiviral response. So that's what he thinks that's what they think is going on. So I wouldn't. I guess it wouldn't quite be true to say that having high status gets you longevity. It's probably more accurate to say that having high status protects you from getting ill. I think it's kind of the same thing, but it's probably slightly more accurate to say. It's not like, it's not like a long life. Well, it kind of is a long life, Phil, but it's like it's more like a protective thing against illness. Yeah.
Good stuff. We have a question from Jamie Donnell. I guess we've sort of covered this. Does everyone see status in the same way? I might not see something as high status that another person does.
Yeah, no, they don't. Yeah. They don't. No, so a classic example would be cars. If you're a middle class person driving a shiny Audi or a shiny BMW or like a whatever, it's seen as a high status thing. But if you're above that in the social class system, an aristo, that's seen as a low status thing.
Yeah.
And I live in the country. The proper poshies, they drive around a knackered old, Land Rover covered in dog hair and mud, and they'll actively look down. And it's the same as like you might get somebody who is in the wellness world, for example, who drives a battered old car, but that's their status symbol. They're showing the game that they're using. So no, we all play different status games, and we all have different criteria for claiming status. And I grew up with when I left home, when I was working in the record shop, I lived with I was a lodger, and another guy living in the house was Tim. He was a hippie, and he was very anti-materialistic. Yeah. And in his head, he wasn't playing the status game because he didn't care about possessions and all that stuff. But of course, he was. It's just that's his way of, that's his criteria for claiming status. Looking down his nose at people who wanted to buy a big telly. His small telly was his status symbol.
Nice. So we've got a question from King2_cool who says, "How are children attracted to status as they grow up?"
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It's almost immediate. And so I mentioned Bruce Hood earlier, who was the guy that got me thinking about this in the first place. And he's published a very interesting book called Possession, which is about the psychology of possessions. And he writes about kids who fight over toys. And toys as a status symbol. The reason they want the toy is not because they want the toy. It's because who has the toy is on top. So that's how that's the kind of one example of a very early manifestation of the status game in kids. And so during childhood, those are the kinds of basic games we're playing, and we're demanding status, we're crying, and getting upset when we don't get the toy, and then what happens in early adolescence is our brains begin to change in a very specific way, and they change such that we become much more interested in social status in the sense of what our peer groups think of us. Is much less about what we've got. I want. Yeah. It's much more about what do other people think about me, and so that's why. Teenagers are this really weird combination of risk takers that drive too fast. And historically, they would smoke and drink, but I think the current generation didn't do that quite so much. We did. Risk takers, but they're also really self-conscious and get really embarrassed. That's just because they're highly, highly attuned to status. So the risk taking is all about look at me, and the high self-consciousness is all about is just that huge sudden awareness that you're being judged by everybody that's looking at you, and that's because the brain is suddenly changed and it's making you an adult.
Yeah.
You're playing adult status games.
Yeah.
And that's why peer group is so important. That's why parents have this experience of losing their children in adolescence. They become other people, and the peer group becomes much more important than the parents, because the peer group is a status game. It's the first proper status game that they play.
And I guess that need for that profound sensitivity to status, I guess that mellows out a bit as we get older. Yeah,
that's a really interesting question. So we're definitely highly attuned to that stuff in adolescence, acutely attuned, and we definitely mellow out. I'm sure there might be data out there, but I didn't come across any data that looked at our need for status across the lifespan. The reason I was interested in that, apart from adolescence, when there's lots of work about how our brains change in adolescence, which maps onto the status game idea. The reason I was interested in it is because it seems to me that when we hit 60, 70, we do become a lot less interested in status.
Yeah.
And I think possibly a lot happier as a result, but I couldn't find, I was interested in the science of retirement, like what happens, are we happier in retirement or not? But it's really mixed. There's really mixed, there's psychology, some people are happier, some people aren't. And a lot of it depends on whether they chose to retire or not. But I couldn't find any clear signal in that. But so I don't know is the answer to the question, but I have a strong suspicion that our need for status kind of is very high in our teens and 20s, maybe kind of plateaus. I kind of hope it starts going down 50s, 60s, 70s. I really hope it does, because it's exhausting.
I wonder, evolutionarily, is the pursuit of status like a sort of survival reproduction type thing?
Yeah, it's completely connected to survival and reproduction, because it's in the groups in which we evolved, the more status you got, the more food you got, the better food you got, the safer your sleeping sites, the greater your choice of access to your choice of mates, the better your children were looked after. So it's deeply, deeply implicated in survival and reproduction. Basically, the more status we got, the better able we were to survive and reproduce. So that's why it's this very basic heuristic in the brain. Go for status.
Yeah.
Because if you go for status, everything else gets better. And that's why it's so fundamental. That's why it's such an obsession, because it's a proxy for survival and reproduction.
Nice. So we've got a Maximil Xan who asks, is virtue signaling disingenuous?
No, virtue signaling, everybody has virtue signaling. We all do virtue signaling. We all do success signaling. We all do dominance signaling, you know, when we're cross with somebody, you know. So no, it's not. It's, I think it's one of those things like echo chambers. So we've got a new, like, fashionable phrase with something that's always existed. You know, echo chambers, we always have groups of like-minded people who see the world in similar ways and sort of clump together with people who share our story of the world. And, you know, there wouldn't be virtue without virtue signaling, because if you don't signal it, you don't get the rewards of the virtue, which is people thinking you're a good person.
Yeah, I suppose even like saying please and thank you is virtual signaling 1.0.
And complaining about virtue signaling is virtue signaling.
Well, yeah, quite.
You know, so it's a silly thing. Yeah.
Nice. We've got a question from Ella Louise. Oh, interesting. How would you recommend dealing with someone who tries to humiliate you in the workplace without turning to gossip to make yourself feel better, specifically when they're a manager who would therefore have higher status than you do?
This is a question that sounds like it's got some
maybe she's got some
backstory to it.
Wonder what Ella's been going through.
Yes, well, that's really hard. I mean, you know, I think if somebody is humiliating you in the workplace, that you should never humiliate people. You know, it's an awful thing to do, and it's also completely counterproductive, because when you humiliate people, you make an enemy, and you don't want to go through life making enemies. How do you deal with it? You know, in my experience, people like that. If you find you're not getting on with them, what you generally find is that other people don't like them either. And if you kind of just tap that a bit, you'll find out that other people don't like them. How do you deal with it without gossiping? Is really hard, because gossip is another one of those things that has a bad rep.
Yeah. It's like a social tool, isn't it?
But it is. It's universal. It's how societies function. So, you know, if you were to take that completely literally, you would say you can't tell anybody about it ever. You're not going to fix it. The only way you can fix it is by, I mean, so the way to fix it would be by going up to that person and actually sitting down with them and saying, look, I'm finding it humiliating the way that you're talking to me. And if that doesn't work, I would just, you know, you have to sort of report them, because you can't go through your professional life being humiliated. It's an awful thing to be put through. There's no excuse for it, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think, like, speaking to that point that, like, everyone wants to be the good guy in their own life story. If I, as a manager, if I have one of my team members come up to me and say that my actions have made them feel humiliated, there is no way that can make me feel like a good guy. So I'm like, oh my God, I need to change something.
Yes.
Like, and I find anytime I've been in that position, that has been what's happened. When I've been speaking to a manager or things like that. So I think often there's just a case of open and honest communication, and we hope that people have sufficient, like, goodwill and, like, niceness and stuff to actually.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. It's that sincerity. One of the best things a boss ever said to me was when I was a features editor, so I was kind of had a management position. Yeah. He took me to one side and he said, keep the emotion out of it. You know, you can talk to people and tell people things are wrong, but you just get too emotional. And when you get emotional, people get upset. And I thought that was such great advice. Like, I was so thankful that he told me that. And so I think when you are having those difficult conversations at work, keep the emotion out of it. So if you go to that boss and say, you know, when you treat me like this, I feel really humiliated, but you're not angry. You don't confront them in that way. If you're calm and not emotional about it, I think that it's got a much greater chance of having success, because they're not feeling like it's a dominance sort of based status challenge. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, Viv Tonoginen asks, can you trick yourself into looking more positively at yourself by implying online that you have a lot? I guess, like, fronting online to feel better about yourself.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, can you? I guess the question is, can you trick your brain into having higher self-esteem by kind of implying on the internet that you have a lot of
I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think that's a bad idea, because you've got to feel authentic. I mean, there's the whole history of the self-esteem movement in America, where and it came out and it went all across the West and much of the world, really. And that was this idea. I wrote about it in my book Selfie, that if you do that, if you love yourself and boost yourself and tell the world you're amazing, you'll just become amazing and everybody will believe it and it'll be fantastic. And it isn't true. Like that's a one-way street to narcissism, you know. So if you want to get status that's not actually connected to anything real, that's what narcissists do. They just say, I deserve high status, and you will treat me as high status, and that is that. And people don't like those people.
Yeah,
you know,
like we're very attuned to overt displays of status.
Yeah,
we don't like it at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
which is why I guess this whole like industry of like signaling status without signaling status has sprung up, because no one's actually going to tolerate me like I am high status.
Exactly.
That's bizarre. Okay, just a bunch of rapid fire questions that we always end the podcast with. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Stop worrying about everything.
Nice. Yeah. Who's had the biggest influence on your career?
I would say the biggest impact on my career would be my agent. And it's a boring answer, but my agent Will. Yeah, I mean, having a good agent just is transformative for my career. Yeah.
What's one tip for someone looking for success?
Just competence. You know, it's that sincerity in the competence. I think it's competence, but it's also understanding that I think one of the things that I learned being a features editor was, you know, when I came to work at Arena, I wanted to bring all these great writers from Loaded and start using them because they were great writers. Yeah. But they were just obnoxious. Right. And you know, so no matter how, so they did really good work, but they just made my life miserable because they were just so obnoxious. Like one guy submitted an interview with Ant and Dec with no punctuation in it. Oh gosh! Like what a dick move! and that taught me a lesson, was that you can be unbelievably good at your job, but if you're a dick, it doesn't matter. So be good, but don't be a dick.
No. Yeah. I guess like competence, warmth, sincerity.
Sincerity, nice. Yeah.
What does the first hour of your day look like?
So the first hour of my day, I've got like a secret Twitter. Oh. I've got a Twitter that I use to promote things, and I've got a secret Twitter which is locked down in an egghead, which is the people who I actually want to read their tweets. There's not many people on it, but I spend the first hour of the day reading like my real my personal Twitter with some coffee. Yeah.
What material item could you not live without?
I tell you what one is I can't live without. Yeah. There's a hot chocolate maker, because I don't drink alcohol anymore. Oh, okay. There's a hot chocolate maker. There's a company called Noops. Okay. Knoops. Right. They do unbelievable hot chocolate. Like, it will blow your mind. Okay. And they sell this hot chocolate machine that makes these hot chocolates at home. It costs about 80 quid. I couldn't live without that.
Sick.
Yeah. Yeah. They're incredible. Yeah. Okay, they make it's just unbelievable.
I didn't know hot chocolate machines existed.
Yeah. Yeah. You put these it's not like powder. It's like little pellets of chocolate, and it heats the milk and whisks it at the same time. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Love it. What book other than your own would you recommend to anyone?
Would I recommend to anyone? So I really like this book, You Could Do Anything with Your Life, Raoul Moat, by a guy called Andrew Hankinson. So I really like Andrew. He's a very, very creative non-fiction writer, so very experimental. And so this book, he managed to get access to all. Raoul Moat was this spree killer. He managed to get access to all his kind of personal documents, and he sort of recreated his life story just using his kind of personal documents, his kind of psychiatric reports and all this stuff. So it's a really fabulous book. So I'd recommend that to anybody.
Nice. Love it. What quote or mantra do you live by?
Oh, that's a really good question. The quote or mantra I live by is, you could never expect 100% life. If you get a 51, you've won. No, day. You can never expect a 100% day. If you get a 51, you've won. Charles Bukowski said that. I think that's a good way to live your life. If you get a 51, you've won.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it. And finally, journey or destination?
Journey every time.
Nice. Love it. Will, thank you so much for coming on. Links to all of the books and your socials and all the things will be in the video description or in the show notes, wherever people are watching this. Nice. Check out the book. It's very good on audiobook. On audiobook. This looks quite intimidating in real life, but it's on audiobook. I promise it's not, and it's genuinely very interesting. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ali. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Alrighty. All right, so that's it for this week's episode of Deep Dive. Thank you so much for watching or listening. All the links and resources that we mentioned in the podcast are going to be linked down in the video description or in the show notes, depending on where you're watching or listening to this. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, then do please leave us a review on the iTunes store. It really helps other people discover the podcast. Or if you're watching this in full HD or 4K on YouTube, then you can leave a comment down below and ask any questions or any insights or any thoughts about the episode. That would be awesome. And if you enjoyed this episode, you might like to check out this episode here as well, which links in with some of the stuff that we talked about in the episode. So thanks for watching. Do hit the subscribe button if you aren't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.